is SMNI News Channel. Truth that matters.
Good day, Philippines, and good day, world. I'm Sarah Santos. It's Tuesday, the 1st of August, 2023, and you're watching Newsline World. We're here to bring you the top stories we've gathered from all over the globe. First, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen arrived in the Philippines to meet President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. to discuss various issues, including trade. In Niger, pro-coup protesters assaulted the French embassy to show their support to the military and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin offered his services to Niger. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy warned that war is coming to Russia following a drone attack in Moscow. Wildfire named Eagle Bluff from United States has crossed British Columbia, Canada, forcing people to evacuate their homes. And Bosom buddies former President Rodrigo Duterte and Pastor Apollo Sikibuloy embark on a motorbike ride once again in Davao City. These and more for tonight's edition of Newsline World. For our first story, Bosom buddies former President Rodrigo Duterte and Pastor Apollo Sikibuloy embark on a motorbike ride once again in Davao City. Let's know more about this with Jean Domingo.
Former President Rodrigo Roa Duterte and Pastor Apollo Sikibuloy enjoyed the weekend exploring the streets of Davao City, this time passing over the newly inaugurated first segment of the coastal road, spanning 7.8 kilometers from Tulip Drive to Bago Playa. Davaoeños spotted two familiar faces on Saturday afternoon plying the roads of the city: the well-loved former president and city mayor Digong, and Pastor Apollo of the Kingdom of Jesus Christ. Joining the motorcade are former Executive Secretary Attorney Salvador Majaldea and Attorney Garrison Gali, a litigation paralegal from California, USA. Some Davao-based aficionados also made it to the 10-man motorcycle group. After delighting some supporters with selfies at one snack joint, the motorbike convoy headed to the Davao City Coastal Bypass Road Project. This is one of the major road projects included in the infrastructure modernization for Davao City that will provide support in the city's urban infrastructure development plan. The team's final stopover was at the former president's humble residence, where they conversed about relevant issues concerning the world today.
Marawi siege cannot receive full compensation for their losses. MJ Modehar tells us more.
Kasalukuyan na tayo nagpoproseso ng tulong pinansyal para sa mga biktima ng Marawi siege upang sila ay makapagsimula muli.
President Bongbong Marcos has mandated agencies to process financial assistance for the victims of the Marawi siege to aid them in their recovery efforts. This was discussed during the convening of the House Ad Hoc Committee on Marawi Rehabilitation and Victims Compensation. According to the Marawi Compensation Board, over 2,000 claims have applied for compensations since it opened on July 4. On the first day alone, millions worth of claims were received.
Doon pa lang sa application level, 400 million for structure and then 300 million for personal properties. One day pa lang yun, no?
The board estimates that over 17,000 families are expected to apply for claims. Moreover, it clarified to claimants that they should not expect a 100% full refund for their lost properties during the war. They also provided advice for those with substantial claims, those who lost businesses, houses, buildings, and real estate properties during the 5-month war in the city.
It cannot be approximated ng ganon, no, 100% kasi ang compensation is not really 100% na you will be compensated. As much as you can prove and as much as the board can adjudicate based on the evidence that you presented.
There is a standard compensation for the families and those who lost their lives during the war. Each family will receive 350,000 pesos as assistance, regardless of the immeasurable value of the lives lost. Here is a standard compensation for the properties.
For the structure, as we said, if it's totally damaged, it's 18,000 per square meter per story. So let's say 100 square meter yung bahay, 1.8 million.
This year, the Marawi Compensation Board has a budget of 1 billion pesos to be distributed among the victims of the Marawi siege. The application for claims is open until July 2024.
Nanunumbalik na ang sigla sa pamayanan, maraming proyekto ang nakumpleto at mga infrastrukturang naitatayo.
To fulfill the President's statement, the Task Force Bangon Marawi is currently working tirelessly.
Yeah, mga katingin ko, abot na tayo ng almost 90% given the new facilities that we have just started.
However, for the local government, the Marawi rehabilitation is far from reality. The initial plan for turnover to the local government unit in December 2022 has been delayed again due to numerous unfinished projects. The lack of a water system in Marawi remains the biggest obstacle. Local officials are hopeful that they can complete the rehabilitation of their city as soon as possible. And this is not forgotten by President Marcos Jr.
Papasalamat tayo sa ating mahal na presidente at ma-remind man lang yung mga department na kung saan kung may mga kulang na proyekto na nasa master plan ng Marawi Rehab, dapat ilagay na.
So nagkakaroon tayo ngayon ng pag-uusap with the Armed Forces of the Philippines, the governor and the mayor and of course the Task Force Bangon Marawi.
With that, local officials concerning the Marawi rehabilitation are hoping that a bigger budget will be allotted for the rehab next year. For Government of Philippines, MJ Mondihar, SMNI News.
The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council recorded more deaths with millions devastated by Typhoon Agay in the Philippines. Almar Forsuelo reports.
The National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, or NDRMC, announced that the recorded death due to Typhoon Agay and the enhanced southwest monsoon increased to 25 individuals. Of this number, 2 are confirmed, while the other 23 are still for validation. Meanwhile, the affected families due to the bad weather ballooned to more than 600,000, or equivalent to more than 2 million individuals. The said number came from 13 regions, 47 provinces, 441 cities and municipalities, and 4,111 barangay. On the overall number of affected, more than 300,000 individuals were temporarily staying in 737 evacuation centers. More than 35,000 houses were damaged by the typhoon, and of this number, more than 1,000 were fully damaged. For God and my beloved Philippines, Almar Forsuelo, SMNI News.
2 people have been found dead in Beijing's Mentogu district as heavy downpours battered the city and surrounding areas. The Chinese capital has been battling its heaviest period of rainfall since 2011. Emergency rescue operations are still ongoing. CGTN's Zheng Chunying has more from Beijing.
I'm now in Fangshan district. It's not raining right now, but it was raining very heavily this afternoon. In fact, it's one of the worst hit areas in Beijing as the heavy downpour hit the city. Earlier, over 100 people were evacuated after being trapped in a logistics center in the region. No death or injuries have been reported yet, thanks to the timely evacuation efforts by the local government. And as you can see behind me, the traffic boards and trees were blown down, and many trees have been inundated. Authorities have issued red alert, which is the highest of its kind for floodings and heavy rainfalls, and warning that the Dashi River in the region, which is just the river behind me, could continue to flood, and telling people to stay away from the rivers. And in fact, the heavy downpour is affecting people all across the capital city and its surrounding regions as well. Beijing authorities have suspended all sports events and closed many public places such as tourist attractions, museums, and parks. And also, the extreme weather is affecting everybody's commute. The Capital International Airport in Beijing said on social media that it has canceled over 50 flights today alone, and Tianjin also canceled over 40 flights. And Beijing's authority said that such extreme weather will last until this Tuesday. So we'll keep you updated. Zheng Chunying reporting from Beijing, Fangshan district.
Following the coup that happened in Niger last week, supporters gathered on the street in front of the French embassy to express their anger and show their support to the military as well as Russia and its president Vladimir Putin. Carlo de la Peña reports.
Thousands of demonstrators in Niamey gathered in front of the French embassy to show their discontent that France and the European Union have decided to cut off their financial assistance to Niger. They were heard shouting support for Niger's junta leader, General Abdurrahmani Tiani, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, although the Kremlin itself has called for the release of Niger's democratically elected president Mohamed Bazoum. Reports say the coup supporters burned the flag of France in front of the embassy. Demonstrators were also seen throwing back tear gas at the building as columns of smoke rise in the surroundings. Pro-coup protesters said they want to send a message to those who were against the military takeover, including the United Nations, African Union, and Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS.
Nous envoyons ce message à l'ONU, à l'unité africaine, à la CEDEAO, à tous ceux qui pensent que le Niger est dans une situation illégale aujourd'hui, qu'ils sachent que c'est aujourd'hui que le Niger est dans son droit. Parce que regardez tout ce beau monde-là qui est sorti. Si on leur demande de sortir hier pour manifester leur liberté, ils ne pourront pas le faire. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, il suffit de dire la vérité. Tu seras éprouvé en prison. Personnellement, je l'ai fait. Et aujourd'hui, j'ai eu la liberté de m'exprimer, de parler au peuple nigérien tout entier et de dire qu'aujourd'hui, nous sommes libres. L'Union africaine, l'ONU, la CEDEAO, l'IA doivent comprendre que le peuple du Niger a été détruit durant ces 13 ans. Et aujourd'hui, nous sommes en train de nous sommes réveillés par le CNLP que nous remercions infiniment. Je transmets par...
In response to the coup in the African country, French President Emmanuel Macron declared that France would react promptly to any aggression against French interests in Niger. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres expressed condemnation towards the military takeover, urging for Bazoum's immediate and unconditional release and calling on all parties to exercise restraint. West African nations implemented economic and travel sanctions against Niger's newly appointed military leaders. They used a stern ultimatum, vowing to resort to force if the deposed President Mohamed Bazoum is not reinstated within a week.
La CEDEAO a dit que si les militaires d'ici 15 jours, le président Tchani n'a pas relâché Bazoum, ils vont intervenir. Nous, les anciens combattants du Niger, nous sommes prêts. On va se donner nous allons intervenir aussi, nous allons les aider, effectivement, pour protéger le pays. Mais même pas la CEDEAO, toute l'Afrique, s'ils peuvent, ils n'ont qu'à préparer leurs militaires, ils vont venir ici au Niger, nous aussi, on va les attaquer. Nous sommes prêts à mourir pour notre pays. Nous sommes prêts, même demain. Nous sommes des anciens combattants, nous sommes prêts à intervenir, à les aider. Parce que ce sont nos frères militaires, ce sont nos frères, ce sont des combattants comme nous.
After attempting to set the embassy on fire and ransack it, the embassy security responded by firing tear gas to disperse the crowd without further escalation. While the attackers were attacking the doors, high-ranking generals of the Niger army arrived at the scene to intervene and disperse them. It can be remembered that Bosom had previously reached an agreement with France in 2022, which allows them to deploy their troops from Mali, their neighboring country to the west, to assist his government. Meanwhile, Russian paramilitary group Wagner's boss, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has hailed the coup. A voice message on Telegram channels associated with Wagner, which they said was Prigozhin, said that the paramilitary did not claim involvement in the Niger coup, but described the event as a long overdue liberation from Western colonizers. He also offered the services of his fighters.
Поэтому то, что произошло в Нигере, это не что иное, как борьба народа Нигера с колонизаторами, которые пытаются навязывать им свои правила жизни, свои условия и держать их в состоянии, которое было в Африке сотни лет назад. И сегодня это фактически обретение независимости. Все остальное, безусловно, зависит от самих граждан Нигера и зависит от того, насколько эффективно будет осуществляться управление. Но самое главное одно – это избавление от колонизаторов.
Reporting, this has been Carlo de la Peña, SMNI News.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, dozens of active reservists in Israel's top special forces unit threatened not to show up for workdays after the country's parliament passed the first bill of a controversial judicial overhaul. Tricia Molina has the details.
Nearly 170 active reservists in Israel's top special forces unit said they will no longer volunteer for service as protests over the government's plan to overhaul the country's judiciary rippled within the Israeli society and the military. Letters signed by thousands of reservists over the last 7 months have up to now mostly remained threats. But this week, the situation could possibly take a different turn after 161 Air Force personnel announced they will stop their service once the legislative changes will push through. As the crisis deepens, the Israel Defense Forces Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi reminded the protesting reservists of the great responsibility assigned to the military, no other than protecting the state of Israel and its civilians.
אתמול היה יום של שיא בעוצמות המחלוקת בחברה הישראלית. בתוך הטלטלה הזו, על צה"ל מוטלת אחריות גדולה להגן על מדינת ישראל ועל אזרחיה. ימי מחלוקת ומשבר דורשים להדגיש את המשותף והמאחד. משימת ההגנה על המדינה היא המחויבות העמוקה שלנו.
A report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, or IISS, previously ranked the Israel Defense Forces as the best equipped, best trained, and most capable in the region, while the 2023 Military Strength Ranking, released by Global Firepower, placed Israel among the top 20 nations based on current available firepower. Despite massive protests, the Israeli parliament, known as the Knesset, passed the first bill of the controversial measure last week. Under the so-called reasonableness bill, the measure removes the court's power to veto government decisions based on them being unreasonable, to which opponents argue will severely undermine the country's democracy. The next step of the judicial reform is due to be voted on in the parliament as early as autumn. Reporting for Newsline World, this has been Tricia Molina, SMNI News.
A week after the Israeli government passed the controversial judicial reform bill, leader of the opposition Yair Lapid demanded the legislation be frozen for 18 months or until 2025 as a precondition to resume negotiations with the coalition. But as Lapid clarified, this would require a 2/3 majority. Monday last week, the bill passed its third and final reading with 64 votes in favor and 0 against, following 30 long hours of debate in the Knesset. Under the reasonableness bill, the review of government decisions would be limited. The Yesh Atid party leader announced that they will appeal to the Supreme Court the law recently passed by the government. Wednesday last week, Israel's highest court said it would review legal challenges to a divisive new law that weakens its power. Civil society groups also filed petitions asking the Supreme Court to strike down the said recently enacted law. Protesters took to the streets for the 30th consecutive week, demonstrations to oppose the controversial bill. Lapid also slammed the Netanyahu government and said, this is the most serious crisis we have ever faced, and it was not caused by our enemies, but by an extremist and radical government. Meanwhile, on Monday, July 31st, Lapid said joining the Netanyahu government would ruin Israel rather than save it if his party was to join Likud. In other news, an out-of-control wildfire named Eagle Bluff rages in Canada, prompting authorities to issue an evacuation order last Saturday night. Justine Nazario reports.
The UN's World Meteorological Organization, or UNWMO, said that climate change has spurred a surge in extreme weather reports. This include Canada's historic wildfires and the dangerous ongoing record heat wave in the US and other countries. A wildfire named Eagle Bluff Fire, which crossed over from the U.S. state of Washington, is approximately 4 kilometers or 2.49 miles from Osoyoos and covers an estimated area of 885 hectares or 2,200 acres on the Canadian side of the border. On the U.S. side, it was approximately 2,000 hectares in size, according to the British Columbia Wildfire Service. Canada's Osoyoos, with an area population of about 6,700, is facing a serious threat as the fire continues to spread. As of Sunday, a total of 732 properties have been under evacuation orders and 2,094 properties are under evacuation alerts. Emergency support has been sought by 132 people. Canada's British Columbia Wildfire Service is actively responding to the incident with initial attack crew personnel, helicopters, structure protection personnel, and heavy equipment. Consequently, the evacuation order spans the area north of the Canada-United States border to the intersection of Highway 97 and Highway 3, as well as west and north along Highway 3. Authorities are closely monitoring the situation, with resources being focused on the eastern flank of the fire. As a result, the situation remains critical, and residents are urged to comply with evacuation orders to ensure their safety. Reporting, this has been Justine Nazario, SMNI News.
In other news, multi-billionaire Elon Musk reportedly denied access to Starlink in Crimea to prevent a strike on Russia. Hans Marshall has the details.
A New York Times report citing sources familiar with the matter claimed that in 2022, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk did not allow Ukraine to utilize Starlink satellite communication system to attack Russia. The New York Times report also said that SpaceX restricted access to its Starlink systems depending on frontline changes. It also used location data gathered by its service in order to enforce certain limits on satellite communication access, which supposedly caused problems during the counter-offensive of Ukraine. Since the start of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, SpaceX has donated over 20,000 Starlink satellite terminals to Ukraine to provide internet access. However, Kyiv reportedly wanted to use the systems to launch a maritime drone and strike Russian ships at Black Sea ports, to which Musk denied access to Starlink near Crimea. It can be noted that earlier this year, in a Twitter post, Musk said that Starlink will not enable the escalation of a conflict that may lead to World War III. Meanwhile, in June of this year, the Pentagon announced that it had awarded a contract to SpaceX for Starlink satellite communication services in Ukraine, but details on the matter remain confidential. This comes after Musk announced in October 2022 that the operation in Ukraine would cost $20 million a month and could not be sustained indefinitely. This is Hans Marshall reporting, SMNI News.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy made a warning hours after a drone attacked the Russian capital of Moscow. The details from Jane Kudnita.
COVID-19 cases are experiencing a surge once again in the United States. The week of July 15 saw more than 7,100 COVID-19 patients hospitalized, a notable increase from the previous week's count of 6,444, as reported by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The CDC issued a warning about a 10% spike in hospitalizations, marking the sharpest increase since December of last year. Moreover, as of July 21, an average of 0.73% of emergency room visits were due to COVID-19, which is up from 0.49% on June 21. Dr. Brendan Jackson, the CDC's COVID incident manager in Atlanta, told American media, and I quote, "After roughly 6-7 months of steady declines, things are starting to tick back again. We've seen the early indicators go up for the past several weeks, and just this week, for the first time in a long time, we've seen hospitalizations tick up as well. This could be the start of a late summer wave," end of quote. Although hospitalization cases have increased, they are still lower than the levels reported the same time last year. In July 2022, there were up to 44,000 weekly hospitalizations and 5% of COVID-19 related emergency room visits recorded. According to reports, unlike previous waves, the recent short spurt in cases is not attributed to the emergence of a single super transmissible variant. The U.S. CDC's current projections indicate that a combination of descendants from the XBB variant, which initially drove infections last winter, is now competing throughout the country. U.S. CDC spokesperson Kathleen Conley said that their agency's current genomic surveillance shows that the rise in infections is attributed to strains closely linked to the Omicron variants that have been circulating since early 2022. The increase in cases reached its relative peak 1 month after federal modelers predicted that the main period of COVID-19 activity is anticipated to take place in late fall and early winter over the next 2 years, with the median peak incidence between November and mid-January. Reporting for Newsline World, this has been Jean Domingo, SMNI News.
The Philippines and the European Union have forged a stronger bilateral relationship after the meeting between President Bongbong Marcos and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Meanwhile, discussions on trade, maritime security, and climate change were tackled by PBBM and the European Commission President. Cablelink has the news.
The Philippine government and the European Commission solidified their commitment to a stronger bilateral relationship. This comes after a successful and productive bilateral meeting between President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen at the Malacanang Palace on July 31st. This occasion marks the first visit of an EU Commission President to the Philippines.
Madame von der Leyen and I concluded a successful and productive bilateral meeting. This is the first visit to the country by the President of the European Commission.
President Marcos stated that the Philippines and the EU agreed to expand trade and enhance cooperation in climate change, maritime security, and green economy. Investment and cooperation within the Global Gateway Strategy were also discussed. The strategy aims to address infrastructure needs in digital, energy, and transportation sectors among partner countries. The chief executive also mentioned that he welcomes the scoping exercises this year between the European Commission and the Philippines towards negotiations for a Philippines-EU Free Trade Agreement or FTA.
The Philippine government experts will work with the European Commission in achieving a bilateral FTA.
European Commission President von der Leyen stated that the free trade agreement holds great potential for both the Philippines and the EU in terms of job opportunities and development.
Our teams will get to work right now on setting the right conditions so that we can get back to the negotiations. A free trade agreement has huge potential for both of us in terms of growth and in terms of jobs.
Meanwhile, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen witnessed the signing of a bilateral agreement for the joint declaration on the Green Economy Program between the Philippines and the European Union. Signing the bilateral agreement were Department of Environment and Natural Resources Secretary Maria Antonio Yulo Laizaga and Ambassador of the European Union to the Philippines, Laoag Veron.
On development cooperation, we committed to conclude a financing agreement on the Green Economy Program in the Philippines, a grant worth 60 million euros, which aims to support the Philippines in areas such as circular economy, renewable energy, and climate change mitigation.
President Marcos also acknowledged the EU's strong support for the Bangsamoro peace process. He also highlighted the progress of the Philippines in terms of rule of law and justice, agriculture, space cooperation, and disaster management. The President also expressed his gratitude to the EU Commission for their dedication to expanding recognition of the standards of training certification and watchkeeping for seafarers certificates issued by the Philippines. President Marcos emphasized that this has a positive impact on the jobs of over 50,000 Filipino seafarers working on EU-flagged vessels. For God and for my beloved Philippines, this has been Cablelink Katarong, SMNI News.
The United States will help Australia produce guided missiles and rockets by 2025 as the two allies take a major step in expanding their military alliance. Julian Rebuit reports.
US will seek to boost its shrinking weapons stockpiles by helping Australia develop a missile manufacturing and exporting industry. Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles announced the project after meetings with US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and Defence Secretary Lloyd Austin III in the city of Brisbane. Marles expressed hope that missile manufacturing could begin in Australia in the next 2 years. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said the plan, which would mutually benefit both countries, would help the United States to sharpen its technological edge and strengthen its defense industrial base as he affirmed stronger U.S. military presence in Australia.
We continue to increase the rotational presence of U.S. forces in Australia. This includes maritime patrol and reconnaissance aircraft, which will enhance our maritime domain awareness in the region. We're also introducing new rotations of U.S. Army watercraft and expeditionary submarine visits to Australia. These efforts will bolster deterrence by strengthening our interoperability and enhancing our sustainment and logistics capabilities for critical missions.
Marles expressed hope the two-day meetings known as the Australia-United States Ministerial Consultation held in Brisbane heavily focused on regional security and military cooperation. After the talks, Marles and Austin travelled to North Queensland to observe the ongoing exercise Talisman Sabre participated by 30,000 troops from 13 countries. The massive joint military exercise, however, were put on hold on Saturday after an Australian military helicopter participating in the war games crashed into the ocean, killing 4 soldiers.
Reporting from New South Wales, this has been Gillian Libuit, SMNI News, Australia.
Still in Australia, the country's fleet of European-made MRH-90 Taipan helicopters will be grounded after it crashed while participating in multinational drills in Australia. Andrea Santos reports.
Australia's 45-strong fleet of MRH-90 Taipan helicopters would cease flying until further notice after one of them crashed into the ocean during a military exercise. The old Taipan helicopters have been repeatedly grounded in the past after officials complained they are difficult to maintain and that its spare parts is not always available. Australian Army Chief Lieutenant Simon Stewart said they're not going to use the military aircraft until it is declared safe. The aircraft crashed last week while taking part in a multinational military exercise known as Talisman Sabre, which features 30,000 military personnel from Australia, US, and several other nations. Debris from the aircraft has been found, but the 4 crew members are still missing. Around 800 Defense and Emergency Services personnel have joined the search for the 4 missing crew members. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Richard Marles said authorities have lost hope finding alive the missing military personnel, with search efforts changed to recovery efforts following the catastrophic incident. Investigators have arrived on Sunday, while the reason for the crash is still unknown. The crash was the second emergency involving an Australian Taipan this year. In March, the same type of aircraft ditched into the search off the coast of the state New South Wales while on training exercise. Reporting, this is Sarah Santos, SMNI News.
Meanwhile, for the first time in Colombia's history, the son of a president has been arrested by authorities. Let's find out why with David Lira.
Over the weekend, Nicolas Petro, the son of President Gustavo Petro, has been arrested by authorities along with his ex-wife, Lourdes del Carmen Vasquez, as part of a probe. The prosecutor's office said in a statement that the pair were taken into custody on orders of a court in Bogota about 6 a.m. local time on Saturday. This comes as a part of a high-profile money laundering investigation into funds Nicolas allegedly collected from convicted drug traffickers during last year's presidential campaign. To recall, the 33-year-old presidential son was placed under investigation by the Fiscalia in early March over the accusations. President Gustavo Petro and prosecutor Francisco Barbosa are known to have had several public fights in the last year, and in recent weeks, Nicolas raised the concern that this could affect the investigation for illicit enrichment. However, reports say that in this court case, the president has promised respect for the investigation, despite the fact that it affects him personally. It can be recalled that younger Petro participated in his father's presidential campaign in 2018 and was a key player in the 2022 campaign. In a post on social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, the president said, "As a person and a father, so much self-destruction hurts me a lot, and the fact that one of my sons goes to jail." He also added, "I wish my son luck and strength. May this event forge your character, and may you reflect on your own mistakes." So far, there have not yet been any recent statements released from Nicolas' side following the arrest. However, it can be remembered the president's son had early denied the claims and welcomed the inquiry when it was launched early this year. This is David Lira reporting SMNI News.
Meanwhile, back to stories in Asia. The industry minister of Japan promised to prevent any reputational damage over the discharge plan of the treated nuclear wastewater into the sea from the defunct Fukushima nuclear power plant. Kent Hashimoto reports.
The Japanese Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Yasutoshi Nishimura, held talks with senior members of the Soma Futaba Fishery Cooperative when he visited Fukushima Prefecture and vowed to avoid reputational damage over the discharge plan of Fukushima treated water.
The discussion held on Sunday comes after cooperative officials from Soma Futaba Fishery voiced out their concerns over the discharge plan of the Fukushima treated water during their talks together with Japanese Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry Yasutoshi Nishimura Sunday. It can be noted that some have expressed their concerns about the discharge plan, saying that after the water discharge, they will not let their children eat locally caught fish, and some say whether the livelihood of local fishers can be protected, and that if China toughens its import restrictions, Japan's fishing industry will be affected. Nishimura then vowed that the government of Japan, together with the International Atomic Energy Agency or the IAEA, will still consistently conduct analysis even after the discharge of the treated water into the sea and up until the full decommissioning of the Fukushima Daiichi plant. It can be remembered that the IAEA disclosed that the government's discharge plan for the treated water has complied with international safety standards.
However, Kono Toshimitsu, head of the cooperative, said that local fishers will face problems until Fukushima Daiichi plant is decommissioned, and that confirming safety is different from ensuring sense of security. SMNI News, Japan.
South Korean and Japanese lawmakers and civic groups joined hand in hand to voice their opposition to Japan's plan to discharge wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Shilo Lee has the details.
South Korea and Japanese lawmakers and protesters held a meeting to take all possible measures to prevent the plan to discharge nuclear contaminated water into the sea. The Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, will push through with their decision to discharge treated radioactive water in August amid strong opposition from lawmakers, civic groups, and some from the international community. And while the decision seems unstoppable, civic groups and lawmakers said they will continue to take all possible measures to prevent the plan.
좋으면 그 수영장에 물도 만들고 사람 식수로도 쓰고 농업용수도 쓰고 하면 되지 왜 그걸 강구하면서 버려요? 조금 더 긴밀하게 여기 집행부들하고 이야기를 해서 버리기 전에 저희가 할 수 있는 액션은 다 취해야겠죠. 그게 최선을 다해서 버릴 때까지는 못 버리게.
한국에서 여론조사를 통해 보면 국민의 85%가 반대하고 있고요. 국회의원 182명이 후쿠시마 오염수를 반대하는 초당적 의원 모임에 참여를 하고 있어서 국회의원의 5분의 3이 반대하고 있고요. 그리고 여러 지자체에서도 많이 반대를 하고 있고 그리고 많은 시민사회단체도 반대를 하고 있습니다.
The Japanese attendees, for their part, said they would manage to convey their firm opposition to the dumping plan to the government.
原発の事故の汚染水は決して今のアルプス処理では放射能は全部取れません。でそのことはもうはっきりしてますけども、そういうものを海に流せばこれから未来も大変な量流れるわけですから、これは絶対に地元で許せないと同時に世界的な海をダメにすることですから許せないと考えています。政府の姿勢は残念なことだと思います。やっぱりもっともっと私たち国民が政府に対してきちんとした言い申し立てをできるように頑張っていきたいと思います。
After the meeting, all the attendees were seen standing up and chanting slogans, encouraging each other to work together for stopping the release of contaminated water into the sea.
海洋放出阻止のために団結して頑張ろう頑張ろう頑張ろう頑張ろう頑張ろう50年60年もしかすると100年以上ねこの汚染水を流し続けるということがどんなに環境に影響を与えるかということは誰もわからないと思うんですね。これだけ放出されてしまえば回収する手立てがないとするとやはり今もう一度立ち止まって放出をまず止めるべきではないか。さまざまな方法が提案されていますので。
Despite strong opposition from all sides, the Japanese government is determined to discharge the nuclear contaminated water in August, and as the date approaches, the international community has continued to express its grave concerns. Among the many experts who are opposing the plan is Zambian environmentalist Robert Chimambo, who said that such a decision is detrimental to itself and the whole world.
They should not be thinking, no, since me I'm safe now. You may be safe now, but in 20 years' time, what goes around comes round. That is the thing about the Japanese disaster. And that should be a lesson for globally, that we should be acting in the interest of the globe, current and future, and not just the so-called national interest.
Solisobogo Sheluli Imnida SMNI News, South Korea.
A tragic explosion of firecrackers at an unauthorized warehouse killed 12 people and injured dozens more in Thailand. Anisa de Guzman has the news.
Death toll from a firecracker explosion in Thailand rose from 2012, with the remains of 2 unidentified persons sent for DNA checks in the Thai province of Narathiwat. Thick smoke billowed from the remains of a warehouse at the Muna Market in Sungai Kolok district, where illegal firecrackers have been stored. Authorities believe the welding during construction work on the said warehouse triggered the explosion. Roughly 1,000 kilograms of gunpowder detonated from the warehouse, killing 12 people and injuring 121 people, with 2 severely wounded. Of this number, at least 111 individuals or more had been discharged from hospital. Approximately 300 houses or more have been damaged by the blast.
ใช่ครับผมก็เลยยืนช็อกครับช็อกอยู่ว่าพ่อผมแล้วก็น้องผมอยู่ข้างในบ้านก็เข้ามาช่วยก็ไม่ได้ใช่ไหมครับไฟกำลังลุกอยู่ก็มันระเบิดอยู่วินาทีตอนที่ผมมาพอไฟดับใช่ไหมครับผมก็เดินออกมา เห็นหลานผมนอนเสียชีวิตอยู่ไฟไหม้ครอบอยู่แล้วก็น้องสาวแล้วก็พ่อนอนเป็นเท่าฐานหมดแล้วครับไหม้หมดเลยทั้งตัวก็ช็อกครับ
บ้านนี้เหลือแต่ผนังบ้านอย่างเดียวหลังคาอะไรห้องนอนอะไรพังหมดอะไรตู้อะไรเสื้อผ้าไหม้หมดผมออกแต่เอาลูกนึกถึงลูกก่อนอะไรนั้นไม่เอาอะไร
วันนี้ภารกิจวันนี้เราก็สำรวจความเสียหายของบ้านเรือนแล้วก็ยังมีผู้ตกค้างที่สูญหายหรือไม่ถ้าสูญหายเราจะได้ค้นในซากปรักหักพังเพราะว่าตอนนี้อยู่ในที่ของอยู่ในการดำเนินการของชุด EOD หาหลักฐานดูก่อนว่าถ้าได้หลักฐานครบเราก็อาจจะลื้อดูซากที่เหลือว่าจะมีคนโดนซากอาคารทับอยู่หรือไม่ครับตอนนี้
Meanwhile, owners of the ill-fated warehouse faces charges of negligence. Invoking martial law, troops and provincial police seized 133 cardboard boxes and 20 sugar sacks containing fireworks and pyrotechnic materials from 4 nearby shops authorities declared as illegal. The items seized belong to the owner of the ill-fated fireworks warehouse. Di siya nanisa di Guzman Drangan Chakontep Mahanakon, SMNI News, Pratetay, Sawadika. In the Philippines, the Department of Agriculture said that possible rice importation will be discussed in a meeting on Tuesday. Margaret Gonzalez reports.
According to the latest data from the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, the amount of damage caused by Typhoon Egay has already reached almost 2 billion pesos. Rice crops, corn, and other high-value crops, as well as livestock, poultry, and fisheries, have been struck with the calamity. President Bongbong Marcos, on the other hand, worries about the country's food security in the aftermath of the typhoon and the potential impact of El Nino. To address these challenges, President Marcos is eyeing a strategic measure that is for rice importation with India to prevent having a shortage.
I'm thinking in terms not only of Region 2 or Region 1, I'm thinking about the national supply for rice. Because ini-import lahat ng Indonesia, nagsara ang Vietnam, maghahanap na naman tayo ng bagong India, nagsara. Pero I think I can make a deal with India. Baka meron tayong mapakiusapan doon. But we have to start importing already. Vietnam says they put na ilabas na raw nila lahat ng kanilang ilalabas. So Thailand pwede pa.
This Wednesday, President Marcos will have an interagency meeting wherein rice importation will be discussed, according to DA spokesperson Rex Estoperes.
We have to finalize, no? Si presidente lang naman ang may authority diyan, no? Yung powers to do that, yung government-to-government deal with India. Tayo naman kasi marami tayong mga relationships so far, no? Yung mga dati natin mga deals with Vietnam, Thailand, and India, and even Pakistan, no?
On the other hand, Estoperes expressed that it's time to widen the government rice production instead of depending on private sectors. The DA is now implementing some interventions such as distributing rice seeds to the affected farmers.
11,871 bags of rice seeds na binigay, 14,426 bags of corn seeds, and 2,582 kilograms of assorted vegetable seeds. Ito yung mga tinamaan ng Egay din sa CAR, yung Cordillera Administrative Region, Region 1, 2, and 3, Calabarzon, Mimaropa, Region 6, and Region 13.
The agency also assures that government still has enough and fair rice to be distributed to the affected residents. For my country and beloved Philippines, this has been Margaret Gonzalez, SMNI News.
A lawmaker expresses support for President Bongbong Marcos' call to grant amnesty to rebel returnees as a step to end armed struggles and deception among Filipinos. Jade Calabroso reports.
A congressman declared support for the proposal of granting amnesty to rebels who will return to the fold of the government. This is in line with President Bongbong Marcos' announcement during his second State of the Nation address that he will issue a proclamation granting amnesty to rebel returnees. According to Deputy Majority Leader and Tingog Party List Congressman Jude Asidre, this shows the president's determination to end the decades-long insurgency in the Philippines.
Honestly, I was, when I first heard it, narinig ko yun, I was actually surprised, and pleasantly surprised with the President. It shows his determination talaga na matapos na ang problema natin sa insurgency, and it shows the right attitude with regards to peace building.
Under Section 19, Article 7 of the 1987 Constitution, the President has the authority to grant amnesty with the concurrence of a majority of all the members of Congress. Fidel V. Ramos was the first president to grant amnesty to rebels when he issued Proclamation number 347 in March 1994. Meanwhile, former President Rodrigo Duterte issued 4 proclamations in 2021, granting amnesty to members of the Communist Movement, Moro National Liberation Front, and Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Meanwhile, Congressman Isidre vehemently condemns all forms of violence perpetrated by the CPP, NPA, NDF.
We always condemn violence in all its forms. Well, the CCP-NPA, of course, kung magpatuloy yung pamamaraan nila, para sa akin, Jade, walang justification for violence in any form.
The lawmaker also supports the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-LCAC, in achieving peace and development in rural areas.
What we're happy with the NTF-LCAC is that we are able to present a pro-development approach in solving the insurgency problem. Hindi naman sa lahat ng pagkakataon, bala rin ang katapat ng bala. Nakikita natin kahirapan, pag nawala ho ang kahirapan, pag nabawasan ang kahirapan, naipabot natin ang serbisyo ng gobyerno. Isang ginagawa ng LCAC, malaking bagay po yun, hindi lang sa pansamantalang kapayapaan, kundi sa pangmatagalang pag-unlad ng ating mga kanayunan, which we fully support.
When asked about increasing the budget of NTF-LCAC, here is the lawmaker's response.
Well, suportahan natin yung mga not just for the anti-insurgency context ng programa, pero alam ho natin at kitang-kita ho natin na direkto ho sa tao ang benepisyo ng mga programa ng LCAC. Nakikita ho natin yun dun sa paggawa ng mga classroom, pagbubukas ng mga daan, at ang epektong maganda ho sa LCAC at kaya tayo susuporta doon is yung long-term talaga na solusyon na binibigay nito. Hindi lang yung pangsamantalang nawala yung insurgency, kundi yung mga nasa ugat mismo ng insurgency ina-address ho natin.
Based on the data from the government's Anti-Communist Task Force, it is estimated that almost 36,000 former rebels have returned to the government. For God and my beloved Philippines, this has been Jade Calabroso, SMNI News.
Turkey urged Sweden to take concrete steps to prevent the burning of the Quran after several protests which involved desecration of the holy book in Stockholm and Copenhagen enraged the Muslim world. Sarah Santos has the details.
In a recent phone call, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan told his Swedish counterpart Tobias Billström that the desecration of the holy book sacred to the Muslims under the guise of freedom of expression was unacceptable. Fidan also strongly condemned the surge in attacks surrounding Quran and said Turkey is in serious discussions with Muslim countries and with nations allowing such incidents to happen. Both foreign ministers also discussed Sweden's membership application, set to be discussed in the Turkish parliament when it reopens in October. In a recent press conference, Fidan acknowledged the steps taken by Stockholm to address Turkey's security concerns, but said the Nordic countries still needs to take further steps. To recall, the Turkish foreign minister earlier this month said that the failure of the Swedish authorities to prevent Quran burning protests in their country is raising security concerns and makes the Nordic countries' credentials for NATO membership questionable, as it represents an image of a country that brings problems to the alliance instead of more power. In response to the dilemma, the Swedish government vowed to review whether it could change Sweden's Public Order Act to give police the possibility to stop demonstrations that will threaten security in the Nordic country. Reporting, this has been Sarah Santos, SMNI News.
NASA's Mission Control in Houston, Texas recently experienced a power blackout that lasted for 1 hour and a half. The power outage meant the entire crew inside the International Space Station, which include astronauts and cosmonauts from different countries, had no means of communication with ground control. Francine Sagarino has the rest of the story.
UAE astronaut Sultan Al Niyadi experienced several historic firsts while inside the ISS. A recent addition to that list includes losing contact with the Earth for 90 minutes straight. The power failure was caused by upgrade work at the Johnson Space Center. The temporary fault forced NASA to rely on backup controls for the first time since the space station was launched in 1998. The space agency assured the power outage did not pose a safety risk to the crew. The Emirati astronaut is entering the final weeks of his historic mission in space as he is due to return to Earth in mid-August. He made history as the first Arab to carry out a long-duration space mission, as well as the first to perform a spacewalk in April. Reporting, this has been Francine Sagarino, SMNI News.
In our sports news, Kurashiki Ablaze from Japan is the champion of the Premier Volleyball League Invitational Conference. Meanwhile, Jose Maria College Lady Royals defeated Lyceum Lady Pirates in the ongoing Shakey's Super League in National Invitationals. Let's find out more about this with Alisa Torres. May you be inspired with the message of the appointed Son of God. When trials and testing come, our loyalty is always to the will and words of the Father. And that's all for today's edition of Newsline World. For more news update, you may visit SMNINewsChannel.com or follow us on our official social media accounts on Rumble, Facebook, and Twitter. For God and my beloved country, the Philippines, I'm Sarah Santos. Thank you for watching Newsline World. And thank you to our beloved Pastor Apollo Sikibuloy, for the opportunity to be a part of this program. May you continue to listen on SMNI as it delivers nothing but fair, truthful, and balanced news, because SMNI is your source of credible news.